Hey everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Gambling Care podcast. Today we have Grainne, who runs the WASP support centre in Rathfarnham in County Dublin. Nick, you're very welcome first and foremost. How did you end up where you ended up? How did you end up in WASP?
Oh, that's a good question.
There's plenty more where that came from.
So I have worked in addiction services more under the rehabilitation remit since about 2004. I was originally kind of in community development and then specialised in rehabilitation and started working with drug and alcohol services. And my role there was to look at, particularly at that time around drugs and alcohol, where drugs and alcohol shows up and how the services can work together around individuals, which meant I was everywhere from homeless services, prisons, child welfare, schools, because drugs and alcohol was everywhere. And then I ended up, WASP was under one of the remit of the funded services. So WASP stands for White Church Addiction Support Project, and it specialises in family support. And at that time, and still actually throughout the country, there's a majority of a standardized model of family support, which is basically traditionally mothers of drug addicts. And at that time, 20 years ago, it was mothers of heroin addicts. And WASP then over the years developed how they worked with individuals. My life exploded about 8 years ago. I left my husband, then I left my job. I became a single parent with 5 kids and wanted to have flexibility and support myself and my children. And so I set up as a consultant and specialized in a number of different areas. But my passion still lay in addiction and really lay in how do you support families through addiction and through rehabilitation. And there was a bit of a misunderstanding as well that we talk about addiction, and there's a line between recreational use, problem use, and hazardous use. And my sweet spot is like, actually, how do we catch people in between and certainly inform families how they can be supportive. And the gambling piece came up more than 3 years ago, but the opportunity came here about 3 years ago because gambling was coming up in addiction work. But we really didn't have a funding line for gambling at all. And so the way some of the statutory services are is that, well, you work with their primary and you're not actually working with the gambling. We didn't have so much around process addiction. And gambling was really coming to the fore. Cocaine was huge, alcohol was huge, and gambling was been named, but we weren't really responding to it. Okay. We had the opportunity through Gambling Care then to set up a gambling specific program here in WASP, which is looking at that family systems model of recovery, where we're working with the family and the suite of services that is there. So that specializes in emotional and behavioral well-being. The behavioral piece is families come because they're in crisis. Just there before I came in here, there's a woman on the phone, her son's 22.5 grand in debt, in casinos and loan sharks for gambling, only gambling, no other addictions with it. And we then needed something specialized to help other professionals understand that process addiction, particularly gambling, is an addiction. It's in the DSM-5. It's a diagnostic, the same as any other substance addiction or alcohol addiction. There was a level of acceptability around substance addictions because people go, well, I can see it. You know, they're addicted to that feeling, but they could not see it or get it at all with gambling. Helping families understand that is a huge part of it, because there's the betrayal. The crisis comes in and families just explode. The betrayal, the lies, the deceit. The family's been left with and you've heard some of our stories today, with the debt and all the problems, while and I'm going to go with the gender majority here, but that's not exclusively men. We've lots of women with gambling addictions too. But while he's in recovery, and recovery becomes the primary, whether that's in residential or that they have to go to GAA meetings and counselling and physical health care and all that sort of stuff. And the woman, and the majority of people in the support services here are women, but again, not exclusively, are left carrying the can, juggling too much. And we see them just deteriorate. Like their physical health deteriorates from the level of chronic stress that they're in. They're not able to cope. their window of tolerance has shrunk so much. So for me, my passion came in expanding to include gambling, and it was an opportunity to work more deeply with families around that broader model of recovery.
A lot of people who find themselves in your line of work have some sort of history or background. In your case, no?
Oh, obviously, yeah. Jesus, we don't walk into addiction services without having like a whole load of baggage, but not gambling. So my background is that I come from a family of alcohol addiction.
And how much did you struggle with understanding gambling as an addiction?
Did I struggle with gambling? I didn't struggle really with understanding gambling as an addiction, because what came to the fore years ago was sex and porn addiction. Really, that came on my radar before gambling addiction. And sex and porn addiction was much harder to wrap your head around and work with people. So gambling it's a similar process addiction, and has much less deviance attached to it. Like, you couldn't have somebody with a porn or a sex addiction, and that we can't even name it sex addiction, because people will accept somebody with a porn addiction, but a sex addiction is a completely different deviance. So you can't really have somebody like that in group work pieces, because it's not as acceptable. Whereas gambling was much easier understood as a process addiction.
How long ago did you realize that, similar to the AA model, Al-Anon, that people who affected others, I suppose, when it comes to gambling, needed a massive amount of support, and maybe slightly different to those offered to the families of people who are in drug addiction or alcohol addiction?
Well, I think there's two things. One is families are instrumental in the intervention and the recovery of people who are in gambling addiction or hazardous use or problem use or wherever they're at, right? Because it can be the family member that sees things or has an awareness of things and will call people out on it or make conditions on things. So that intervention is massive for the whole family and the entire family dynamics, including the individual with the addiction. So it isn't this kind of tough love, control things. It's like part of the suite of services here is family mediation. It's like, how do you work things out? You know, what was unique about some of the women coming today is like, people often think if there's a gambling addiction and they've lost all this money, and it's like, get them out, get rid of them, marriage breakup. That's not what we do here. It's like, how do we figure out the family dynamic? How do we figure out there's a huge amount of codependency in addiction, and there's a huge amount of codependency then in recovery. So they're the two things. So one is they're a huge assist in the intervention. What our understanding is, and part of my challenge is that, say, residential services will do a family intervention model, which is like, as you were talking about earlier, is that the family come down, isn't he doing well in recovery? And, we'll do a few pieces. But the family intervention model is about how can the family wrap around the individual in addiction so that he doesn't relapse again? How do we as a family keep him well? That's not our model. Our model is everybody has responsibility to keep themselves well. Everybody has to work on their own individual recovery to couple and change and facilitate healthy relationships and boundaries moving forward.
So when those family members come in, how many times per minute do you have to make them realize this is about them rather than what their focus has been for the last whatever amount of years?
Well, that takes time, because really people are coming in huge crisis.
Yeah.
That's why it's behavioral and emotional. For the first while, could be months, could be a year, you're really looking at behavioral change. You're looking at interventions. You're looking at how to support people through the massive problems that addiction has caused in their family unit. And then through group work and through one-to-one work, they see what's wonderful about the group spaces. They see, oh, that person is where I was at, and remember, oh my God, I arrived in like a bag of cats. Like, oh my God, is that how crazy I sounded? Because they're just so stressed out and overwhelmed. You see them come into the room, they can't even breathe. They're just, and there's no like breathing going on at all. They're just white knuckling it all the time. I don't know. And that's our thing. Like, recovery takes a long time, and family recovery takes a long time.
How long have you been doing this job?
The gambling specific piece here?
Yeah.
3 years. Yeah.
Have you noticed a change in the demographic?
We do gambling education talks every year to all of the family support groups, men and women across. There's like over 50 families involved in this very small service. It's predominantly women that came forward to join the family support piece, and it's predominantly men that have come forward for gambling specific supports. What I have found interesting is that through the gambling education programs, there's still lots of individuals and family members who will go, yeah. Oh, yeah, he's on the crypto as well. And he invests in stocks and he lost that and he lost this and he does that now. And he goes to Cheltenham every year and he does that and he loses everything. And then he goes on a bender after losing everything. So they're still on the bender. So that's a challenge for us to go, this is a comorbidity issue. We need to deal with this and with this. And what has been interesting as well is targeting communities. So gambling is quite big in the traveller community. And, you know, you're approaching that and you're engaging in that in a slightly different way, how you are sensitive to, you know, cultural nuances as well.
How far does your net spread as far as who can come into this service?
Well, the gambling specific one really, because there's a gap in the family support pieces and it's on the Gambling Care website, is a little bit nationwide. Like we have clients in Cork, but all we can offer them is a phone service with a view to stabilizing stuff and then referring into whatever pathways are available. So we would be tied in obviously through any of the addiction services or the family resource national network.
In that situation that is desperate enough, regardless if they're in Cork or the Aran Islands, is there anybody who would say, listen, can I please come and attend the meeting or tap into your services?
Somebody wants to come from the Aran Islands to come here?
Or Cork or wherever.
Oh, yeah, like anybody can come here. Yeah, but it's not logistically smart. Do you know what I mean? Like it's
it's not a long-term plan. I will agree that it's
so
not
that's
a
why
long-term
we would
plan.
Try and, you know,
no, just
the
reason I just wanted to realize, was it open to?
Yeah, so there is a
everybody.
geographical remit to other parts of the service. So WASP offers a suite of services and it's funded on a number of different pillars. So there is a speciality in working with people with intellectual difficulties who have high-risk behaviours, gambling being one of those. There is the family support arm, there's the gambling-specific arm, and we have a drug-related intimidation arm, which is crossing over very closely with the gambling as well, because we have a lot of people who are gambling who have debts to loan sharks. Even though it doesn't come under technically the drug-related intimidation, it's the same intimidation, the same debt.
So gambling as an issue, how big of an issue do you think gambling is in this country?
I suppose for me, there's two hats on this. Like on the one hand, we're looking at statistically, there's over 130,000 people in gambling addiction. So from a family's point of view, you know, and that's addiction. So we've like 280,000 in problem gambling. So from a family point of view, that's 750,000 families in Ireland alone impacted. That's huge, right? But as a single parent with 5 kids, 4 of them sons, and they're all teenagers now. They don't have money, but they're always trying to make money. There seems to be, particularly with the boys, and I haven't found this with my daughter at all, and she's in college and we would talk about everything related to gambling and addiction and cocaine, anything that could be going on in college. But for the 4 boys all in school, it is absolutely commonplace for them to bet on anything. One of them was just playing golf, 15 years old, and he's like, oh, I just won a tenner. Like, how did you possibly win a tenner? You were like, I just left you at the golf club. He's like, oh, I won. And I said, well, please give that back. I don't want you gathering a €5 off your friends every time you win. And I certainly am going to be sponsoring you to pay €5 every time you lose on top of your golf fees. And, you know, they're all footballers, they're all GAA players, and every match, they're discussing it. So for me, it lays really, really heavy on me, and been as a parent to be able to discuss it all the time. But I know I'm on it all the time because I work in this and I see it, whereas it can seem very innocent. And there's a lot around high risk behaviours attached to young men and sports, in my view. for example. Betting, like they won school GAA, Leinster, All Ireland. I can't remember. They're amazing, my children. They win everything. But anyways, they won something. There was beers on the bus on the way home, and they had already bet on who was going to be the top goal scorer. So this just really unhealthy risk behaviors, even in a school setting, where as parents you're going,
safe.
The principal and the teachers were all there, and then they all went for beers afterwards. And they've been doing this since he was in transition year. So I, as a parent, I suppose I have to be very careful around how do I navigate the school and not report them to TUSLA and make a big drama about things, but how do you support schools in celebrating in healthy ways and monitoring things that they can monitor?
Yeah, I think I think sport and school, they'll all reflect society, and I think that gives you an insight. And you have massive insight having 4 boys into just the issue that it is. And funny you should mention sport, because there's a study in England that people who play competitive team sport are twice as likely to become compulsive gamblers. People who play competitive team sport are 3 times more likely to become compulsive gamblers. So there is...
But they're huge stats, because people have this assumption that sport is the greatest protective factor. Yeah. And to me, it's not. It's actually my kids' greatest risk factor.
Big time. When people ask me about the effect it had on my career, I'd say, first of all, sport saved my life at that time. But sport was a massive contributing factor to get me to where I was.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's all around them. So it's nearly like osmosis. And we're at an age, I think, with teenage culture. And I've literally just given a lecture on the opposite to toxic masculinity, because I find it exceptionally offensive that we have this kind of drunk branding of young men that they're ticking time bombs of like toxic masculinity. And I find that offensive as a parent and really insulting to my young men, who are obviously amazing. But their culture and their lifestyles is different than my generation and even 10 years before them. So they're living by osmosis at a much higher level than ever before. That like what they're experiencing is without thought at times. So it's like the betting on this, the drinking on this, and the role models around them all the time. The coaches are doing it, the teachers are doing it. Men are going to do what they see. Women are going to do what they see as well, but my sons are going to do what they see is around them, because these are men that they look up to, who that they aspire to be, and this is how they're behaving. And it's not that the men around them are behaving badly, but I don't think some of them realize the risk, because it can happen like that. Like there's a gambling addiction gene. There's there's all sorts of other mitigating circumstances. Like my children are children of divorce. That's an adverse childhood experience. That increases their risk immediately.
Yeah, I suppose just 2 more things. Is there anything since you've come into the job and you've offered the gambling support service, is there anything that has surprised you?
Family members coming in going, gambling, like, what's that about? Like, it's Grainne, just tell them to stop, like that.
Get a serious addiction.
That's kind of front and center about it. Second of all, gambling, it'll just go away when the other stuff goes away. So it's not serious. The other piece is the level of, and it's probably not unique to gambling, but it is unique to family members, what they go through. So that's codependency is an issue. PTSD and complex PTSD is a really significant issue and problem that keeps recurring for family members. And that has an impact on the family dynamic and the addiction. So if you have a family member who's got PTSD over something that's happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, it's still there, and it'll kick off at any time. Grief is huge. Family members are mourning the loss of the life that they thought they had, or where they should be at in constant time, unless they're doing the work around that. There'll always be that resentment for what has been robbed from them, whether it's the son, the husband, the partner, whatever. Women calling. There's been women have been calling a lot around gambling addiction that don't make that conversion into getting help. So that's a sweet spot that I'd be interested in. I haven't worked with enough really to know, but my spider senses would be that there's such a significant level of shame. So one example would be a woman who is gambling 1,500 a week. Her husband doesn't have a problem with that. Her son was diagnosed with autism, and she's at home alone with him on her own all the time. And they as a couple, so really they're not coping around the diagnosis and how they're going to deal with that. And so she just got sucked into a web of gambling and didn't know how to stop herself.
And I think around recovery, my finding is it is more difficult for women to get into long-term recovery with gambling because it is very male dominated. I do feel if a woman walks into a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, it is very male dominated, and it's brilliant to hear that there's obviously unique meetings, popping up all around the country for just purely for women who are in trouble with gambling addiction. Last question: one piece of advice to somebody out there who has a family member who's struggling with a gambling addiction. And are willing or not willing to come forward.
I think one of the things that comes up for me a lot with families is that the family member is nearly looking for the person who is gambling's permission that it is a gambling problem, and therefore the family member can go and talk about it or get help or whatever. And a family member does not want to out anybody or have anybody think bad of their loved one. Like, you'll hear that all the time. Like, it's a true love story. Like, they really don't want for anybody to judge them around this addiction, them themselves, but particularly their loved one. So my advice would be, it doesn't matter whether anybody else is identifying it as a problem, or if it's a big problem or a little problem. If it's a problem for you, go onto the Gambling Care website and just have a phone call. You don't even have to give your real name. You can call me or anybody and just have a chat. That's it. No one's going to drag you into a service kicking and screaming. It's just a conversation.
Not only are you doing your job, but you're actually doing my job as well. So I was just about to say that anybody who is in bother, get in touch with GamblingCare.ie. It'll point you in the right direction. All of the services are on there and free and available for people. There's also a 24-hour helpline, 7 days a week. And if you're in trouble, get in contact. And once again, thank you very much for facilitating us today, for welcoming us and giving us such an insight into what is obviously a massive issue.
Well, you've been a joy to have. Thanks very much.
Thank you.